Where to get a dinner jacket? Should she bow? How do you say Your Majesty in English? Such bewildered sighs filled the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg in October 1994. It was the first time Britain's Queen Elizabeth II had traveled to Russia. This year, on April 21, the Queen would have turned 97. I suggest we get the opinion of the only people who saw the Queen on that single trip to Russia. A window to Europe. Should you smell her perfume when the Queen walks past you? Students whispered in the corridors of the 12 Colleges building on 19 October 1994. This is how that day is described in the archival newspaper of St. Petersburg State University. At the time, the entire university was in ears. I was studying at the history department, specializing in medieval English history, recalls Alexei Mishushin, a St. Petersburg resident. On the right day, I was in the 12 Colleges building. The buzz was all around, people were enthusiastic, the country was opening up to the world. On the sidelines, there was gossip. The meeting is for students, and there are half the teachers in the hall. The Queen will be amazed at the age of Russian students. And now a rumor was already crawling through the ranks. She's here. The Queen has arrived. Elizabeth spoke in English, but in front of each of those present there were sheets of paper with translations of her words. Alexei, as a historian, still treasures his own sheet. The window to Europe is open again, and other windows like this one are also open all over Russia, Elizabeth said that day. So how did the Russian grandmother deceive Queen Elizabeth II? I'll tell you in a moment, but in the meantime, thank the author by liking and subscribing to the channel. When the last word, written on a piece of paper, sounded in the hall, the Queen said goodbye. Curious citizens were already waiting for her in front of the building, and in this mass of excited students suddenly appeared grandmother. My great-grandmother Nina Mikhailovna was very curious. There was a maternity hospital opposite the 12 Colleges building. I was born there on that day. Elizaveta Belotsvetova told Komsomolskaya. Her curious grandmother was on her way to the maternity hospital that day, but she was very much attracted by the hustle and bustle of the neighboring building. The pensioner was noticed by the consul in the crowd of young people. A cinematic dialogue ensued. "Woman, what are you doing here?" "The British Queen Elizabeth has come to visit us." The consul who noticed her turned to Nina Mikhaylovna. We know," said the woman. "And today I have a great-granddaughter was born in honor of the Queen and was named Elizabeth." So the whole of St. Petersburg learned of Lisa's birth. The newspapers quickly spread the good news. The next morning, the British were standing outside the maternity hospital where the baby was sleeping sweetly, unaware of the honor bestowed. Foreigners came, as they should, with flowers and gifts. In the best tradition of hospitality, they were given a turnaround by the headmistress. My mother said that the head of the maternity hospital suddenly ran into her room, grabbed her by the dressing gown, and started shaking her, saying, "Who are you? Are you an English spy or a close associate of the Queen?" And my mother had no idea that someone had come to see her, lass Elizabeth, whose grandmother had made a mess of things. There was no decent dressing gown or nappies in the hospital, so the foreigners never met the mother. They were forbidden to do so. As the foreigners did not reach Elizabeth's newborn daughter, the gifts they left for her did not reach her either. Such was the time. They only gave flowers. They promised to give them back later. But the maternity hospital took it over because the presents were awesome for those times. Washing machine, non-pouring bottle, nappies. It was something unique for 1994. My mother was 20 years old. She had no strength after giving birth to assert her rights, says the girl. Liza's family does not publicize this story very often. They say it is something on the verge of fiction, too much like a fairy tale. In fact, as it turned out later, it was a fantasy to begin with. The grandmother deceived the Queen's subjects. In fact, that's not how it happened. My grandmother embellished it a bit. My parents had thought up my name a long time ago. They liked it, and it had nothing to do with the Queen. My grandmother made it up as she went along, when talking to the consul, that's Nina Mikhailovna's great-granddaughter. How an ordinary Russian grandmother tricked Britain's Queen Elizabeth II. Another Russian jeweler fooled the Queen. Cunning Russians. Let me tell you how it was. The deception, of course, is not of an international scale, so forgivable. The jeweler Andrei Ananov thought the same after a couple of days when, like Nina Mikhailovna, he lied to the British Queen. A week before Elizabeth arrived in Moscow, my phone rang unexpectedly. I did not even believe what I heard at first. Vladimir Shevchenko, head of the Russian president's protocol service, is speaking to you. Boris Yeltsin says he needs a present for the Queen of Great Britain. Will you do it? Andrei Ananov told KP. I asked how much time I had and what the budget was. A couple of days and $500. I told him that in such a short time and for such money to make a gift to the Queen is impossible. That was the end of the conversation. But this phone conversation with the jeweler for a long time gave no peace. Previously, he could not imagine a situation where he stands next to the Queen, and then such a chance. Connections came into play. I did a lot of different jewelry colors in the Fabregat technique. There was only one left in my own collection at the time. It was a blackberry sprig. The stem was of gold, the leaves were of jade, and the berry was of black morion. It all stood in a vase of rock crystal. I thought that a flower would be just right for a lady, and there was no choice, las Andrei Ananov. Taking a sprig of blackberries and a magnifying glass, the jeweler set off to meet the Queen. Realizing that I needed to stretch the time, I came up with a move. When the Queen approached, I showed her the sprig of blackberries I had found in my box and handed her a magnifying glass with the words, "Your Majesty, I know that at Buckingham Palace you have the best collection of Fabregat pieces in the world. You are a connoisseur of jewelry. Here, please see what Russian craftsmen can do." Everything I said next was a completely made-up legend, says the jeweler, and he had a great speech. I told her the following tale. Your Majesty, this is not just a twig. It is made after a black and white historic photograph of the desk of your late relative and our last Tsar Nicholas Romanov. He had this flower in the center of his desk, apparently his favorite. She didn't burst into tears, of course. She didn't cringe, but she listened very carefully. She was so intelligent, delicate, and polite. This is what distinguishes all queens, assures the master. So you cheated her a little? Yes, I cheated her a lot, but I don't think that's too bad. International relations were not affected, says the jeweler with amusement. But this little deception and gift to the Queen has brought the Russian jeweler advertising in the British press and overseas orders, and later invitations to the birthday party to the Queen herself. I received an offer from a publishing house, which published a greeting book for the Queen's 70th birthday, to write a greeting to the Queen. I simply took my firm's letterhead and typed the letter to the Queen on my typewriter. I was sure it would all get typed up, retyped. It wasn't. They just copied it and put it in the way it was. On the next page was a greeting from the President of the United States. It was all very pretty, of course, says Andrei Ananov. Then I got an invitation to the Queen's birthday itself, but I didn't fly to London. Standing there somewhere in the crowd was of no interest to me. That's the interesting story of Queen Elizabeth Hugh's life I managed to find. What do you think? Did you enjoy the video?